After the confusion of Babel, humanity was scattered across the earth. Languages were divided, cultures began to form, and people spread into different regions and nations. The world was moving forward again, but the deeper problem that had existed since the fall of humanity still remained. The human heart continued to drift away from God. Instead of abandoning His creation, God chose a new path to begin restoring His relationship with humanity. Rather than working through large civilizations or powerful empires, God chose a single person, one man, one life through which His plan would begin to unfold. That man was Abram, later known as Abraham. Abram lived in a place called Ur, a prosperous city in ancient Mesopotamia. It was a place of trade, culture, and stability. Abram had a family, possessions, and a life that seemed secure. From a human perspective, there was no obvious reason to leave everything behind. Yet one day, God spoke to Abram and gave him a call that would change the course of history. God said, "Leave your country, your people, and your father's household, and go to the land I will show you." This command required something extraordinary: faith. God did not provide a map. He did not explain every step of the journey. He simply asked Abram to trust Him, and Abram obeyed. One of the most remarkable aspects of Abram's story is that he began his journey without knowing where it would lead. The Bible tells us that Abram set out as the Lord had told him, leaving behind everything familiar. Imagine the courage this required. Leaving one's homeland in the ancient world meant leaving security, identity, and protection. Cities and tribes were the center of survival. Outside of them, life could be dangerous and uncertain. Yet Abram chose to trust God's voice more than his own comfort. Faith often begins exactly this way. It begins when a person chooses to trust God, even when the future is not fully visible. Abram's journey reminds us that faith is not about understanding every detail of God's plan. It is about trusting the one who is guiding the journey. As Abram traveled, God made an incredible promise to him. God said that Abram would become the father of a great nation. His descendants would be numerous, and through his family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed. This promise was astonishing for several reasons. First, Abram and his wife Sarai were already advanced in age. They had no children, and from a human perspective, it seemed impossible that they would suddenly become the beginning of a great nation. Second, the promise was far larger than Abram himself. God was speaking about generations that would come long after Abram's lifetime. Yet Abram believed. The Bible later describes Abram's faith with these powerful words: Abram believed the Lord, and it was credited to him as righteousness. Faith, in its deepest sense, is trusting God's promise, even when circumstances appear to contradict it. Abram's journey was not easy. Along the way, he faced challenges, doubts, and moments of uncertainty. There were times when he had to wait years to see even a small part of God's promise begin to unfold. Waiting is often one of the most difficult aspects of faith. Human beings naturally want immediate results. We want answers, clarity, and visible progress. But God's timing is often different from our expectations. Abram had to learn patience. Year after year passed, yet he continued to trust the promise God had given him. This teaches us something very important about spiritual growth. Faith is strengthened in the waiting. Waiting does not mean God has forgotten his promise. Sometimes waiting is the process through which God shapes the heart of the person who will carry that promise forward. At one point in Abram's journey, God made a covenant with him. A covenant is a sacred promise, something deeper and stronger than a simple agreement. God reaffirmed his promise that Abram's descendants would become a great nation and that through them God's blessing would reach the entire world. During this moment, God also changed Abram's name to Abraham, which means father of many nations. Names in the Bible often represent identity and purpose. By changing Abram's name, God was declaring that Abraham's future would be defined not by his past circumstances, but by God's promise. This moment reminds us that when God calls someone, he often gives them a new identity as well. Perhaps the most famous moment in Abraham's life came many years later, when God asked him to do something that seemed almost impossible to understand. After waiting decades for the promised son, Isaac was finally born. Isaac represented the fulfillment of God's promise and the future of Abraham's family. Yet one day, God asked Abraham to take Isaac to a mountain and offer him as a sacrifice. This request was a test of Abraham's faith. From a human perspective, it seemed contradictory. Why would God ask for the very child through whom his promise was supposed to be fulfilled? Yet Abraham chose to trust God even when he did not fully understand. At the last moment, God stopped Abraham and provided another sacrifice. The test revealed the depth of Abraham's trust and obedience. Faith sometimes requires trusting God beyond what our logic can explain. The story of Abraham is not simply about one man's journey thousands of years ago. It is about the nature of faith itself. Abraham teaches us that faith begins with listening to God's voice, continues through obedience, and grows stronger through patience and trust. His life shows us that faith does not mean the absence of difficulty. Instead, faith is the decision to trust God even when circumstances are uncertain. In many ways, Abraham's story prepares the way for the greater story that unfolds throughout the rest of the Bible, the story of God's plan to bless all nations. Through Abraham's descendants came the people of Israel, and through that line, generations later, came Jesus Christ. The promise that began with one man eventually became a blessing for the entire world. The story of Abraham invites us to reflect on our own journey of faith. Every person faces moments where the future is uncertain. Decisions must be made without complete clarity. Paths must be taken without knowing exactly where they will lead. Faith means trusting that God is guiding the journey. Like Abraham, we are often called to move forward before we can see the full picture. We may not understand every step, but we can trust the one who sees the entire path. Abraham's life reminds us that God often works through ordinary people who are simply willing to trust Him. You do not have to be powerful or famous to be part of God's purpose. You only need faith. And sometimes that faith begins with a single step forward, a step that may seem small in the moment, but one that carries enormous significance. Many of the greatest journeys of faith recorded in Scripture began not with certainty, but with a simple decision to trust God one step at a time. Abraham did not begin his journey knowing how history would remember him. He did not see the generations that would follow, the nations that would rise from his descendants, or the role his faith would play in God's unfolding plan for humanity. He simply listened, trusted, and moved forward. This is often how God works in our lives as well. Rarely does God reveal the entire path at once. Instead, He invites us to trust Him with the next step. Faith grows in motion. It deepens as we continue walking, even when we cannot see the full destination. Abraham's story teaches us that obedience in the present moment can shape a future far greater than we imagine. Think about how different history would look if Abraham had refused that first call. If he had chosen comfort instead of trust, security instead of obedience, the story of redemption might have taken a very different path. Yet Abraham believed that the voice of God was more trustworthy than the stability of the life he already had. Because of that decision, a covenant began, a promise began, a lineage began that would eventually lead to one of the most important moments in human history. Through Abraham's family line, generations later, Jesus Christ would be born. This connection reveals something powerful. God's plans often unfold across generations. What begins as a step of faith in one life can become a blessing for countless lives in the future. Abraham likely never fully grasped the magnitude of what God was doing through him. Yet his obedience became part of a story far larger than his own lifetime. This reminds us that faith is never wasted. Even when the results are not immediately visible, even when the journey feels slow, every act of trust in God carries meaning. Every moment of obedience shapes the path ahead. Abraham's life also teaches us something important about identity. His name was changed from Abram to Abraham because God was redefining who he would become. God often sees a future in us that we cannot yet see in ourselves. When he calls someone, he also begins transforming them into the person needed to fulfill that calling. This transformation rarely happens instantly. It happens over time, through experiences, challenges, waiting seasons, and moments of growth. Abraham experienced moments of doubt. He made mistakes along the way. Yet the defining characteristic of his life was that he continued to return to faith. He continued to trust God's promise, even when circumstances seemed confusing. That persistence is what made Abraham a model of faith. And his story continues to speak into our lives today. Many people are waiting for perfect clarity before they move forward. They want every answer before they take action. But faith often works in the opposite way. Clarity grows as we walk. Understanding increases as we trust. The path becomes clearer after the first step. So the question that Abraham's story quietly asks each of us is this: what step of faith might God be inviting you to take today? For some, that step may be learning to trust God again after a difficult season. For others, it may mean choosing forgiveness, pursuing a purpose that feels uncertain, or beginning a journey of faith that has been delayed by fear. Whatever the step may be, the story of Abraham reminds us that faith begins with trust and trust begins with movement. One step, one decision, one act of obedience. And sometimes, that single step becomes the beginning of a journey that changes everything.